when I was crawled up in a ball in a fetal position crying on my garage floor, it was because I literally no longer knew who I was as a human.
Welcome to Behind the Armor, where we deep dive into the heart of what matters. I'm your host, Judd Shaw, adventurer, storyteller, agent of change, and speaker on authenticity and human connection. Join me as we explore the complexities of human connection, featuring theorists, scientists, and speakers. Our mission is simple: to inspire you to reclaim your true self and create genuine connections with others. Join me as we lay down our armor and live authentically.
Hello, you beautiful people, and thanks for tuning in. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Michelle Johnston. Dr. Michelle transforms leaders into influential forces. Utilizing her expertise as a distinguished professor in the College of Business at Loyola University, New Orleans, Michelle inspires audiences as a keynote speaker and shares practical wisdom in her best-selling book, The Seismic Shift in Leadership. Advocating a departure from conventional command and control methods, Dr. Michelle promotes a connection-based approach to achieve long-lasting results. Let's find out what's behind the armor with Dr. Michelle.
Dr. Michelle Johnston, I cannot tell you how long I have been eagerly waiting to have this conversation with you.
I feel the same way, Judd, ever since we met in Detroit, and it was just this immediate connection and alignment with what we're both trying to do and the difference we're trying to make. And I can't wait. Let's go.
You know, it's no coincidence that we had such a strong connection that for the audience, we did not coordinate this, but you and I are both wearing our spring pink.
And you grew up in New Orleans, and that's where I'm based. How about that? So we have that connection, and then all of our work is centered around connection, and we both have podcasts. I mean, this is super cool. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And we're going to dive into how you are such a beautiful catalyst for change, forging authentic connections that are really empowering leaders to their full potential, to rising organizations and teams using authentic human connection. And I wanted, you mentioned that it started when we had that first and very brief meeting.
Yeah.
At a joint event that we were at. But there was something about that. And being you're all about authentic human connection, and that's my space too. And we're going to really do such a deep dive on that today. But what was it, at least from your perspective, that gave us that immediate deep connection?
Yeah. And so that's what I'm trying to do is figure out. It's one thing, like, you got to figure out what in the world is connection. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? What can you do to get more of it, since we are in an epidemic of loneliness, disconnection, and isolation? And so you and I are trying to give people tips and strategies. And so one of the things I tell people to do, particularly for leaders, because that's my primary focus, is working with organizations and with leaders, is you have to embed time to really ask deeper questions so that you can find commonality. And I was walking out the door, I'm pretty sure, leaving this meeting in Detroit to fly to New York for a work trip. And in our brief conversation, we immediately realized that you grew up right down the street from where I live. So we have the New Orleans connection. And then everything that you're doing with your story that you shared with me, that's what you shared. You shared your story. It was so powerful, Judd. And that you realized that you were missing connection, authentic connection. You had to find that in yourself. And then once you did, everything changed for the better. And now you want to help others. And once you shared your story with me, and that's why whenever I work with teams and groups of executives, and tomorrow I'm running up to Baton Rouge and working with hundreds of leaders, I make sure that the first thing we do is share our stories, because once you know someone's story, it's very hard to judge. So I think those were the two elements. We found that we had a lot in common, and then I knew your story. And so then I could trust you. I saw you. I felt safe with you. We were aligned. And so that's what, when I started researching and wrote my book, The Seismic Shift in Leadership, I interviewed 18 leaders from around the world trying to figure this connection thing out, because I realized that the leaders who truly were good in connection were succeeding, and the leaders who were totally disconnected from their teams and led with power and control and ego were not succeeding. And one of the things I found out, that what drives connection with self is being in a place and knowing yourself enough where you can show up authentically. And I think that's the essence of what you do and how you lead your life.
Thank you. And I really felt that. And I felt our connection. You remind me that we all have a story. And, you are a distinguished professor at Loyola University in New Orleans. As you noted, you wrote the incredible book, The Seismic Shift in Leadership. You are a renowned keynote speaker. And you also are an executive coach and have a podcast yourself. And with that, all of that sort of thought leadership that you approach your work with organizations and executives started somewhere. And as I realized that I had a story, there was a behind the armor with Michelle Johnston. There was this 1.0 version of her life that existed before catapulting into becoming this change catalyst. Yes?
Oh, absolutely. So you and I are both fans of Brene Brown's research. And I'll never forget, I don't know what birthday it was, but one of my good girlfriends gave me Brene's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. And I grew up a corporate brat. And so I was born in Alexandria, Virginia, ended up living in Baltimore, Maryland, East Brunswick, New Jersey, Rochester Hills, Michigan, Hendersonville, Tennessee, Tampa, Florida, Memphis, Tennessee, Birmingham, Alabama. I mean, we moved. And it was exciting growing up. I wasn't miserable at all. It was a fun adventure and just learning about different cultures and different people and just all over the country. And I loved making new friends. And yet once I got into my real job at Loyola, I was struggling in the classroom connecting because I just was fitting in, adapting. I looked around at, okay, what do other professors do? Well, I need to emulate them. And I remember reading Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection, and the first time in my life. And I mean, Judd, I think I was 30 something at least. 35 probably, maybe even older. And I realized that my entire life I'd been trying to fit in because that's all I knew since I had to move around so much was just fit in to be accepted. And her research shows that fitting in is the opposite of belonging.
Right.
And that in order to truly belong, you have to belong to yourself. And in order to do that, you had to connect with yourself. And that was the first time I realized I so wasn't connected with myself. That's why I wasn't doing a good job connecting with others, particularly with students, because I would just march in and lecture and march out and make no effort whatsoever on building a culture of connection. It's funny because I've got to teach my MBA class tonight in a couple of hours. And last Monday night, I was evaluated by my colleagues. Once a year, they come in and they evaluate just to make sure, that you're holding the standards high. And I began every single one of my classes with some sort of connection question. And so with my colleagues sitting there, I said, I just want to let you all know how I've evolved as a professor all these years. I never, ever would have taken 20 minutes out of our evening together to ask you about what, since we've seen you last, are you most excited about? And I had the two professors who were evaluating me a part of the circle, and they got to share what was exciting to them, what has happened that they're proud of since we last have seen each other. And it was so powerful, Judd, because that's what I learned. I was not trying to connect at all. I was just one way imparting information, thinking that's what a professor was supposed to do. And the good news is I know better now. But that was the reason why I just started this huge journey realizing that I had been disconnected from myself because all I did was try to fit in. Fitting in, it doesn't work. And then I wanted to help leaders, the leaders that I was seeing fail, and a bunch of them were failing. There was a seismic shift going on in the workplace. The reason they were failing is because they were disconnected and they weren't taking the time to build connections. So that's how it all began for me.
I also understand that the fitting in, the cry for belonging, that was also part of your personal life as well. What you were doing, whether it be Loyola, classmates, students, etc., was sort of mirroring in your personal life, which it seemed to me really was the catapult to finding yourself and your own superpower. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I usually don't talk about my personal life, but I will for you because I know you want to go deep. Yeah, I was married and just tried to be an amazing wife. And again, all I knew at the time was just fitting in, fitting in, fitting in. And so I just made the whole world revolve around my husband at the time and really lost myself. And that was no fault of his. He had it pretty good. But it came at a great cost for me because I ended up with no voice, and so I finally had to say, I have got to connect with myself. I have to find my voice again. I have to figure out who in the heck I am. Who am I? What is my story? And I realized that moving around so much, if somebody said, like, if I moved to Birmingham, Alabama, which I did right when I started Auburn University, and people would say, oh, where are you from? I'd say, oh, where are you from? And they'd say, Birmingham. I'm from Birmingham. Oh, I just was this chameleon and it didn't work. And it's so surface and you can only go so far with relationships when you don't even know who you are. It would have been so much better for me if I would have just been able to say, hey, I've moved around all over the place. I'm really not from anywhere. But I'm so happy to meet you and I'm happy to be at Auburn. But instead, I kind of hid pieces and parts of myself like, oh, gosh, I didn't tell anybody that I really was a Yankee. I was in the middle of the state of Alabama. I kind of hid that I really, lived in Detroit and East Brunswick because I was just trying to be, to get accepted and to fit in. And I think that's what I did in my marriage too, is I just was trying to be accepted and to fit in and to make the world revolve around everybody but me. And again, it came at a great cost. And I finally had the courage to say, this is not working for me. So my whole career truly catapulted and took off after my divorce when I was able to say, I have got to figure me out and be really comfortable and strong in who I am. And then everything else and then I can help others. I couldn't help others without first helping myself.
It so resonates with me. And I really appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing that because therein lies the real lesson to all of us. Which is what happens is we begin to drive away from who we really are. Even sometimes these micro actions, they add up to a point where we're wearing masks. And for me, I wore it so long, I didn't even know who was behind it anymore. I was someone for this group, someone for this place, someone for work, someone for live, someone for play, but it was all again fitting in or trying to manipulate a situation or a feeling of unsafetyness and navigating with a hyper vigilant, fight or flight state. Who to trust, who not. It was exhausting.
It is exhausting. You're right.
Right? And what I had realized is that whole time, in the end, when I was crawled up in a ball in a fetal position crying on my garage floor, it was because I literally no longer knew who I was as a human. I felt like a shell of a human. Like, who am I? That, I think, is the most disconnected, the loneliest a human can be.
Oh, absolutely. When you just lose yourself and you just don't know who you are. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That was at one of my lowest points in my marriage where I just had no voice, and I just didn't even know who I was and what I wanted in life. And I had to figure that out. And unfortunately, the only way that we could figure that out is by separating and going our separate ways. I think we're most happy, we're happier, much happier now, my ex-husband and I, apart. And he was able to really be himself with a different partner. And now I'm really finding my way, which is great. And I feel like most of my happiness these days comes from helping others, since I have been down that path and I know it, far too well. You had mentioned the mask of perfection. So when I was conducting all these interviews with other leaders to figure out what does it take to be a connected leader at work, and that first level of connection with self. So it's first own your story and really do a lot of work. I remember when I read the book, Gifts of Imperfection, and Brene talked about you have to own your story and not have any shame and not hide pieces and parts of yourself. And so immediately I thought, what a great exercise. And I started having my students own their story in the classroom. And yet still, Judd, I was still so used to just putting one foot in front of the other and going. I realized when I was listening to my students' stories, I still didn't know my own story. I still didn't have a grasp of my story. So I had to own my story. I have all of my students own their stories, and all of my leaders, when I coach them, they own their story and they get rid of whatever shame they have, and they own their entire life and their childhood and who they are, and they own the struggles and the challenges. And then that second piece, again, going back, giving up perfection is what I learned. The second thing, so many of my leaders said they realized that no one was really pulling for them when they were so certain that they were perfect and wouldn't show any flaws at all. And ultimately what then they did is they created a culture of fear rather than a culture of connection, because they demanded perfection from everybody who was around them because they expected it of themselves. And when you demand perfection of others, then others don't feel comfortable speaking up, taking risks. So then you don't have an innovative company. So it's a very easy equation. You can see, right, how somebody who's so uncomfortable in their own skin demands that I just have to show up perfect, even though I'm not, and I'm going to pretend that I'm perfect. And then I demand perfection in everybody else. And then I've got a culture of fear. It's just a really bad scenario. So that's the second step of connection with self, is giving up or owning your imperfections and giving up perfection. And one of the other things that leaders said, and I'll never forget, Tanya Tetlow was the president of Loyola at the time. She's now the president of Fordham. She is just an amazing leader. And she sings opera as well. And she said, I learned early on singing opera, if I messed up a little bit, I realized the audience actually was pulling more for me because they had empathy. They didn't want to see me mess up. Whereas if I just tried to pretend that I was perfect all the time, they weren't necessarily pulling for me. I remember one of the other leaders that I interviewed, Larry Kloss, just an incredible leader. And he said, yeah, some of my best leadership lessons happened early on in my sports when I was still in school. And I realized when I screwed up, rather than getting so angry and pretending that didn't happen, I went to my teammates and said, man, can you help me? I'm struggling in this area. Can you help? And then I interviewed Drew Brees, who at the time was the quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, our NFL team. And he said the same thing. He begins in the offseason, in order to connect with all of his offensive players, he takes out a notebook and a pen and he goes around to each person and he says, I want to help you. Here's what I'm struggling with, and here's my goal. And so can you help me? And tell me what can I help you with? And he did it personally and professionally. So it wasn't just on the field. He would also talk about his relationship with his wife, Brittany. He had 4 kids, and he kept it all in a notebook. So I think what we're learning here is, in order to truly be a connected leader, a connected human, we have to really take time first to own our story, give up perfection, and find commonality with others and enlist their help and say, hey, life is a journey. Every day I'm trying to grow and evolve. Let's do it together. Here's what I'm working on. What are you working on? Let's help each other. I think I now have 3 groups of people that I meet with. Yes, a group of all women. Most of them are all women, but advisory groups where we lift each other up. and we get together once a month. Here's what I'm working on. What are you working on? How can I help you? Here are my ideas. Judd, actually, I have 4 because you're in one of them with our cohort for Impact 11. And those groups are so beautiful because we're able to be vulnerable. We're able to share. Here's what I'm working on. We're able to listen to other ideas. That's connection.
That was so amazing. And there's so much I want to unpack there. The more I owned my story, the more I was able to roll that in to my why, which made that purpose and passion in what we're doing so much stronger for me. I didn't feel the shame of it anymore. I no longer felt the guilt of it. In fact, it seemed like many of this had to happen for all of this now to happen too. You also had me thinking that you have sort of a departure for your command and control approach to teaching authentic human connection and promoting it, which produces lasting and longing effects. And for me, the first thing was, who am I? Right? So when I went and began my transformation out in California, I remember there was a moment where it was like, what do you want to do? Like, how do you want to feel? What do you want to taste? What do you want to see? I started being intentional because I had never thought about what I wanted, as opposed to this incredible craving to fit in and gain external validation. And when I was able to stay there with that, I found myself going on the beach, watching the water come up and down and the sun setting and glistening as the water tide would go low and the sand would sparkle. And I would stand there, and it was this incredible moment that you remind me of. And I think that the feeling, this incredible feeling, like I can taste it, I can smell where I was. I know what I was wearing in that moment in August of 2020. Wow. And I think that moment, to your point, was being in touch with the first time with my most authentic self.
Thank you for taking me there. That was really beautiful. And it was such vivid imagery of the sand and the sun and the sparkle, and just finally being honest and being real and being present and not having to, as you said, receive external validation to make you feel whole.
Yeah.
To find validation within. And
Yes.
That's the real key here, right? And it's spending a lot of time. And I hope that your listeners can pick up on that the only way that we got to this point where we're really, truly helping others is we had to spend a whole lot of time unpacking what had happened in our past, owning it, not being ashamed of it, recognizing that that's how we grew. That was a challenge that was put in our life, but let's focus on how we were resilient and how we overcame that challenge, incorporating that into our story rather than shying away from it, reflecting, appreciating, having gratitude for what we've gone through, being able to have a mindset that's not victim. That's huge to get out of that victim mindset and say, you know what, this is who I am and it makes me different, and different is good. And so I want your listeners to understand that true connection with self takes a lot of time and dedication, and a lot of time journaling, and a lot of time, whether it's sitting in the sand or wherever your, place in nature is, to really kind of get back in touch with yourself. So my third thing that I learned through all of my interviews about connection with self is owning your style too. So I have this assessment called the Communication Preference Profile. And whatever assessment you take, there are so many communication assessments out there. Just figure out by taking some assessments of how you show up in the world. We show up differently. And particularly when it comes to connection, because I'm renaming that assessment, the connection assessment. When it comes to connection, I show up as, and this is, I think you too, if you were to take it, Judd, for so long, I showed up just as action. I was an achievement junkie. And I think you and I were both looking for external validation, trying to fit in. And so as achievement, junkies, I was just going. So the best part of my day was checking off the to-do list. So I mean, I even had colleagues that would tell me, yeah, like I would try to pop into your office, Michelle, but man, you shooed me out. You had stuff to do. I said, gosh, you are so right. I was just so action. It's called action focused in my communication. Whereas a high people person really places value and puts time towards relationships. And I had to relearn how to do that in order to be much better at connection, because I was just moving forward. Forward momentum was the key to me, but forward momentum wasn't bringing me the connection that brought joy to my life at all. Achievement, as you know, because you achieved the most. I mean, you had your face all over billboards, and you had all of the luxury goods to show it, right? The money, the boats, the cars, the airplanes. So you had achieved it, and then had to look inside and say, am I really happy? Right. That wasn't really truly bringing you happiness. And so again, we have to spend a lot of time getting to know ourselves first. And once you do that, then you show up authentically in the world, then you can meaningfully connect with others. And then that's where the satisfaction and fulfillment comes. It comes through others. I should have brought the big pile of books that are downstairs on my island in my kitchen. I mean, Judd, I think in the past 2 weeks, I've got 9 books that have all been written about connection. From authors like David Brooks, who's typically, he's a columnist, and he's typically talking about politics. And he just wrote a book to know oneself, or to connect, to know others, to connect better and to show up better. I mean, it seems like we are definitely onto something, that there is this epidemic of loneliness and disconnection. And Vivek Murthy, our U.S. Surgeon General, wrote a book that Dr. Bob Waldinger, the longest study at Harvard, everyone who's trying to make a difference in the world is saying we are in a really bad spot, and we know what the answer is, and the answer is true, meaningful connection.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, Brooks, the name of the book. I know it's a red cover. I ordered it too. It's on my kitchen in one of these books that I plan on reading on one of these weeks to shut down and just get some me time with the books. But people pleasing, perfectionism, success and achievement, these were all coping mechanisms for me too. These were just masks that I wore in order to not feel the shame, the guilt, to fit in, not be judged, to be liked, to be praised. So all of those for me were cloaking. These behaviors were really the mask that I was wearing, just as much as other people can wear ones with drugs and alcohol and gambling and sex, pornography, internet, whatever they are. They're all things that are taking us away from ourselves. And, you reminded me that I did this keynote out in California, and I was up there, and at one point I realized that I had used the clicker on my slide deck, and I was going the wrong way. And by the time I looked over to this big screen to the left and the big screen to the right, I'm 3 slides behind my keynote, right? And all I did on that moment was capture the humanness of it, the vulnerability of it. I mean, I'm talking on human connection. Let's connect. I said, wow, look at that. I'll figure this thing out at some point. And everybody laughed, and everybody kicked back, and everybody had a sense of, a lot of this stuff is sometimes heavy stuff. That's a break in a moment, a lighthearted, a warm-hearted, a connecting humanness to it. And picking up on that, about a half hour into it, I started like, I needed water. And so I looked around and I realized that the table wasn't set up that way for this keynote with a water bottle, but I had one off stage. So I asked permission if I could just step off for a second to get a bottle of water. I get back on stage, I drink the water, and I'm like, that's so much better. And everybody again laughed and had this moment that I connected with the audience. And it was then that I realized that these moments don't drive disconnection. In fact, when I'm more human, more vulnerable, more honest, more apt to make a mistake, own it like it's my story, and move forward, I'm more likely to connect with others.
You're absolutely right. All of a sudden you had the audience going, oh, thank goodness he's not perfect. He's more like me. I'm like him. Oh, good. I need water too. Sometimes I don't get the clicker right either. Oh, thank goodness. Yeah, you're human. And you were able to admit that. And I wrote about a time, and I wrote about this in my book. Early on in my teaching, I had it in my head that I had to be perfect. And I had in my head that being all powerful was the way to go in the classroom, that never give up your powerful. Don't ever say give up your power. Don't ever say you're sick. Don't tell them you're sick. Don't ever say you made a mistake. It was kind of, that's the old command and control. And so there was a night in a stadium style classroom. I was lecturing, I was teaching on nonverbal communication, and my heel just flew off. I mean, spiraled. Thank goodness didn't hit anybody in the lip, because I've seen that happen before. So I didn't bloody anybody, but now all of a sudden my shoe's 6 feet, 8 feet away. And rather than laughing and being human, I just pretended it didn't happen. I wobbled over, put my shoe back on, and I kept lecturing. And like my students were just giggling. And what an opportunity back then for me just to laugh too and say, well, let's talk about that nonverbal communication. Like, how do you handle that in the middle of a speech? But instead, and the script in my head was, don't let them see you sweat. Don't let them see you sweat. Don't give up power. And gosh, I wish I could go back and just show them that being human is so much better. What a missed opportunity. But I was young.
Well, you, though, use a framework to teach authentic human connection and building it to organizations and executives and team leaders. And oftentimes we say to people, bring your best self to work, or, be your best version. And for me, again, at some point, I didn't even know what that looked like. I didn't even know I did want to go to the beach, sit on the sidewalk, go for a taco. I don't know, but I really listened to myself, and I used that as my guide. And so when I re-engineered my healing after my transformation, about 2 years, I thought, how can I put it into a framework where others could understand the steps that I took to find who Judd was? As you pointed out, I can't connect with others if I can't connect with myself. How can I love someone else if I don't love myself? And so at the ultimate, doing research and speaking to professionals and my own experiences and all my different forms of therapies and learning, I ultimately put together the Connection Cure. Cure standing for conscious awareness, which means knowing that we're showing up in the world masked up, that there are some places where we are still not our authentic selves, sometimes even with people we know really well. So why is that? So it's the first thing is being aware that you're not genuine. You're not being completely authentic. And the second one is the U in Cure is understanding. So that is understanding the reasons we mask up. Maybe for some, it's loss of a loved one when they were young. Maybe it was a childhood trauma, emotional neglect like it was for me. Our caregivers or society taught us that we couldn't be ourselves. Maybe it was a list of things, but understanding the root of that is your ability to address it. Can't fix a problem that you don't know it. The third part is then renewing, and I wholeheartedly love what you said, which is, for me, under renewing, is connecting with yourself first and then connecting with others as that true self. And then lastly is the E for expanding, which is how can we now take this new ability of our authentic version and deepen those connections that we have and expand them out into the world that we live, work, love, and play. And so that's sort of like, for me, those rings, each of those steps is the step to deep connection with yourself first and with others. And your framework, which is based on 3 sort of crucial tiers, if you would, is the same authentic human connection when you break it down. But this is a beautiful way because I'm showing individuals, and in this way, you're showing actually teams or departments or organizations the same effect. Can you walk me through that?
Absolutely. So what I discovered, again, in all of my interviews, because I also want your listeners to know, I think it's very clear now that Judd and I didn't come out of the womb as brilliant connectors. We had to really live our lives. We had to struggle. We had to fall down. We had to get back up and then figure it out. And so in all of my interviews, when I got to we've already deconstructed that first level for leaders is connection with self and spending all that time, in order then to get to level 2, which is connection with your team. And what I found is that, and this is very Jesuit, because, I've been at Loyola for over 20 years, which is a Jesuit university. And one of the Jesuit philosophies is show up, treat others as full versions of themselves, full humans, show care and compassion for each individual as a full human. And so that's step number 1 of connection with your team, is leaders need to recognize that the people on their team are not just numbers and what they bring to the bottom line. Treat them as full humans. Embed connection questions to your team meetings. So not only you can go deeper and get to know them on a personal level, but so they can get to know each other. I'll give you an example. We have a brand new dean, Bobby Savoy, and he's never been in academia. So our dean went on and he was the president of our board of trustees. He's formed 3 companies, sold them all for millions and millions and millions of dollars, and thought, I love Loyola. They need a dean. Why don't I be a dean for a little bit? So he's our interim dean. And the very first faculty meeting, Judd, this is crazy. After 20 years, we've never done anything like this. I know my colleagues. I've worked with them for 20 years. I know them as colleagues. He asked us to show up with 1 slide and to talk about what brings us joy, to share pictures of our children, what we like to do as hobbies. And that was his very first introduction to us. And let me tell you, that was my first introduction after 20 years to my colleagues at a more meaningful level. And I didn't even tell him to do that. Right. Usually I'm the one who tells leaders, okay, first begin with something that goes personal. That was brilliant. So that's the first step in connection with your team, is you have to embed time in your rhythm in order to provide opportunities to connect. And you do that with connection questions. So the second, go ahead.
Before you jump there, one of the examples that I can offer is we do one of 2 things. So I have a smaller team that I work with within our organization. And every morning we start with a connection card. And you can buy these on Amazon. There's boxes and boxes of them. For couples, for individual, whatever. It doesn't really matter because you can always play and mix a question, but we do that. So I'll shuffle the deck and I'll be like, I'd stop there. Okay, left or right? Left. What is driving passion for you today? And they'll answer, then the next person will answer, and then I'll answer. And that's the connection card. And we do that every day. And some are interesting. What's holding you back from meeting your goals? but you learn, and our team, and that drives that connection. We're using literal connection cards in the meeting. And the other thing we've done is do name tags, but on your name tag, you just have to put something you want people to know about you, but not your name, like dog owner, horse lover, marathon runner. And sort of like, in other words, we see past a name or a title, we see something, it's about you. We're hearing and we're seeing the you. So those are a couple of things we do. And
I
you just
love
reminded me
that.
of those.
Thank you so much for sharing, Judd. I love collecting ideas like that, because that's one of the ways now, what my mission is to now help leaders and organizations do the connecting. My book was all about, okay, here's what I found in all of my research. Here's the definition of connection: to be seen, heard, valued, respected, appreciated. So we're able to figure out that's the definition of connection. Okay. And then what does it look like? 3 levels, right? And so I'm in the second level right now of connecting with team. It's first show up as a full human and make sure that your people feel seen, heard, valued, respected, and appreciated. And how do you do that? You begin by asking questions and finding the commonality and building bridges. I'll never forget, during the pandemic, we were on a Zoom call and I was coaching one of my leaders, and he said, okay, I'm going to ask everybody just on a scale of 1 to 10, how are they doing and why? I said, okay, fair enough. And one of the guys said, I'm like a 3. I just became an empty nester and this is horrible. And my leader, who was a chief, said, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I just became an empty nester. Let's talk in our next one-on-one. I can empathize. And it's times like that. Again, the reason why you do that in a team meeting, because I have some leaders who say, Michelle, I'll get personal and ask those questions in one-on-ones. I don't need to spend time in a team meeting. We've got things to accomplish in our agenda. And I said, well, let's back up. Because connection drives results. That's my tagline. That's what I've realized, that if you embed time for your team to truly become safe with each other, vulnerable with each other, share more than just how's the weather, how you doing, then that drives the trust. And then you can go big. And that's where the results will come in. But you have to embed that time. And so that you get to know each other more. So it's number 1, show up and show your people that you care about them as a full human. Number 2, listen first. And so what I'm trying to tell my leaders to do in their team meetings, the old command and control style was all about talking. It was all about, communicating was more transactional. Here's what I need you to do. Any questions? No. Okay. Bye-bye. And now, let's create an environment of connection where it's much more about listening. So you as the leader, wait last to talk. And first ask a question that goes deeper, get them, feeling safe and getting to know each other, and then have them share updates on the projects, and then ask them to, what can we do to help each other? And at the very end, come in and give your updates. So the second tenet under connection with your team is listen first in order to lead. And then the third one, which I learned, was much more this seismic shift in leadership is really becoming more of a leader as a servant leader, a leader as a coach, a leader as somebody that's there just to remove barriers, to ask questions, and to bring it out in you and develop you. So it's a very different orientation. And then ultimately, as you said, there are 3 tiers. The top level of connection, at least as far as I've gone in an organization, is the connection with your organization. So I was really struggling with this, Judd. I was thinking,
before you go on to the connection with organization, you have 3 parts of the connection with self, right? And those parts are
owning your story, give up perfection, own your communication style.
Then from there, you can move to connection with team. And those, again, have 3 subparts, and they are
show care and compassion as your people are full humans, listen to lead first, and show up as a servant leader.
With those last 2, for me, it reminds me that I felt that any great meeting in our organization, even others, is when you can walk in and you cannot identify the leader. That's a great meeting. That's where people feel they can raise their hand, foster advice, feedback, give suggestions, surface problems, tell the business or the company their feelings if it's heading into a direction they're not comfortable with, but really engaging in your team. Enter a meeting, not be able to identify who the CEO, president, founder, blah, blah, blah is, you got a really good meeting. And that second part to that was that I now realize that my job is not to do your job. It's to teach you how to do your job. And so that when I come around, my questions would be, how can I help you? How can I support you? Is there anything you need from me? That's a different dynamic when I connect with my team to your points, to your framework. In that way, I know that my culture is higher, my productivity is higher, efficiency, less mistakes. We're just running on a higher engine.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you just mentioned the results that you're trying to go after, right? Efficiency, retention, productivity. Those are whatever results that you can identify is what you're going after. If you can do it through connection. At least it will give you a much better chance of getting there and achieving your results. You're absolutely right. And I love how you talked about how you show up as a servant leader, that your job is to coach. Your job is to coach them and to say, how can I support you? What do you need from me? How can I help you? And let me help you through my questioning, through the questions that I ask. I'm not going to ask you, why did you do that? I'm going to say, what do you think? I wonder if. What are some obstacles you're facing? What do you really want in this? And it's your questioning as a leader, which will help develop them so that you can pull up and be your highest version and be a very strategic leader. In order to do that, you have to pull up and allow your people to lead, right? And that's totally very hard for people to do and not micromanage. And so that's the real transition is you as a leader, in order to pull up, you've got to develop your people and give them confidence that they actually do know what to do. And they do have the answers and show them the support that they've got it.
I can fly at 35,000 feet at much more efficiency. Yes. I can come down to the tarmac every once in a while, but your frontline managers, supervisors, when everybody is connected, leadership can stay there because they're leading from an authentic standpoint, from a servant standpoint, and things on the ground just get done. But that's connection with self, that's connection with team. But for you, we have that final element that goes into connection with organization. Tell me about it.
Yeah, that was a real struggle for me because I didn't know how in the world you connect with the organization. And so I remember being in one of the CEO's office, and his name is Warner Thomas, and he's now the CEO of Sutter Health out in California. And I said, Warner, help me out here. How in the world do you connect with 40,000 employees? He goes, I can tell you that's an easy one. I said, do tell. He said, you must own your calendar. Owning your calendar is true connection with your organization. And how you do that is, first, as a leader, you identify the key stakeholders necessary for you to be successful. Who are the key stakeholders you need? Then you have to figure out your rhythm. How often should you be meeting with them? In what form? Should it be one-on-one? Should it be team? What is the cadence? And he said, once you get the rhythm in place, and then he said, you mentioned, Michelle, how do I connect with 40,000 people? He said, then I've got to go, that's my weekly, my monthly rhythm. Then I have to pull way out and figure out how to do these huge meetings. So now once a year, we bus in the thousands of employees from all over so that they can personally hear my strategic message, my vision, what our goals are, what our priorities are. I want them to hear it from me. Now, a lot of leaders do that now through video and put it on the website, but this particular leader really did spend the money to bus everybody in across this entire region in the convention center to hear from him and to be able to ask him any questions. So owning your calendar is absolutely crucial. in order to connect with your company. And he said it really irks him when his leaders come to him and complain, I don't have any time to do my job. All I'm in are meetings all day. He said, well, then you've lost control of your calendar because your calendar is now owning you. And let me give you something too that I've learned, Judd, when I just got back, not just got back, but I went to this great Thinkers 50 gala for the top 50 thinkers in the world. And where we are now is not even with meeting management. We're calling it connection management, interaction management, energy management. So owning your calendar, I mean, we really have to disrupt. Do we have to meet in a conference room every time? Probably not. Can we do more connection walks and get outside? Probably so. I now conduct a lot of my coaching calls with my earbuds in, and I'll say, hey, do you want to get some steps in? I'll put my buds in and I'll walk around the park. And you're in California. Do you want to do the same? Absolutely. And it was a struggle in the beginning because I felt, oh gosh, I'm giving up that face-to-face on Zoom. But yet, there's so much creativity that comes when you're moving your body and you're out in nature and you're talking through it. In any case, the point is owning your calendar is crucial. And there are so many different ways these days that you can do that. So that's number one, owning your calendar. The second way you connect with your organization is making sure that you truly are aligned with the company goals. And I have a lot of stories in my book of leaders who ended up quitting their jobs. They quit their jobs during the pandemic. They quit their jobs right after 9/11 because they realized that they were, which I think you had one of those moments of, oh my gosh, what am I doing all of this for? I don't even believe in the company mission. This isn't who I want to be. And that was what happened with the Great Resignation, right? A lot of these employees said, I have a jerk boss who I hate. He or she doesn't even know who I am and doesn't value me. I'm not doing this anymore. So alignment is key, making sure that you really are aligned with the company's values, owning your calendar. And the third one I really learned from Todd Graves, who is the founder of Raising Cane's Chicken. And he has been on a global expansion tour these past couple of years, took off during the pandemic. He's all over the world now. And he said, I looked around. I wanted to open up a chicken finger Raising Cane's, and I realized my competition was McDonald's and Burger King. And so I went in and I saw that their workers weren't very happy. And so I tried to figure out why. Well, they were wearing polyester uniforms that they didn't like. They were listening to music that they didn't like, and they were having to follow scripts that they didn't like. He said, so I wanted to create a positive culture that was fun. So if you go through the Raising Cane's drive-through, I tell them, just joke around with the customers. Begin with cluck, cluck. He goes, you pick your uniforms, pick your music. Let's have fun. And so whenever you see Todd Graves now, he is all about promoting artists and entertainment. And let's just create a positive culture where you feel good. So that was the third thing. Connection with your organization as a leader is really creating this positive environment where your people can thrive and have fun.
Such an amazing framework. I have to tell you, this conversation has reminded me of exactly why I felt so deeply connected to you from the very beginning when we first spoke. And that is, you're just so authentic. You're so real and raw. You're so amazingly intelligent and confident and deeply understanding and non-judgmental. And all of these sort of characteristics allow for a conversation that feels so heartwarming, so real, and so beautiful. And I can't thank you enough.
Oh, Judd, that was just the kindest. Thank you so much for that compliment. And I feel the same way. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I loved our conversation. You asked beautiful questions. And to all of your listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And we want you to be a part of our movement, right? Mm-hmm. We really are trying. Judd and I are trying to make a difference in the world by teaching and showing people how to connect more meaningfully with themselves so that they can connect more meaningfully with others. Because that's what brings real satisfaction and joy. So thank you so much.
Last question for you. You have been featured in Forbes, recognized and honored as City Businesswoman of the Year. You have been recognized as one of the most influential figures in New Orleans. You're doing so much on human connection with organizations, some of the largest in the world. How, in the end, does Dr. Michelle Johnston best authentically connect with herself?
I was thinking today, as I put on this pink dress in honor of the upcoming Easter weekend, that I am so looking forward to Thursday, getting on an airplane and meeting my daughter and my father and my brother and sister-in-law and nieces and nephews at our lake place in South Carolina, and just disconnecting. One of the things that I've learned the most about connection as high-level leaders is we have to disconnect in order to be good to ourselves. And so I was just thinking, gosh, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I get to truly disconnect and spend time in nature with my family, and I can't wait.
What's one of the favorite activities that the family tradition does at the lake?
Oh, my brother has a pontoon boat at my dad's dock, and my dad has a pontoon boat, and we just love, it's a 650 square miles of shoreline. It's a massive freshwater lake, and we just love circling the lake and watching the sunset and the birds and nature. It's just beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's good for the soul.
I hope you have the most incredible, most connecting, most joyful time. And again, I love your support, your energy, your thought leadership. You are a beautiful human being. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Judd. Right back at you. Take care.
I want to extend my deepest gratitude to you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow us on your favorite platform or share this episode with a friend. You can also follow me on Instagram at Judd Shaw Official. A special thank you to personal injury law firm Judd Shaw Injury Law for their support in helping us bring this podcast to life. Remember, friends, authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about embracing our vulnerabilities, celebrating our strengths, and owning our stories. Until next time.